Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. Super Bowl week. We made it. The final football game of the football calendar year. Greg's been grinding away. I know you've been watching a lot of college tape here in the lead up, Greg, as you've had some time.
Yeah, it's that's a bear. There's a lot of guys. The worst thing is defense, Buck, because you got to watch whole games. And when teams have like six, seven guys, and there's a bunch of teams that have like six, seven guys who are, you know, meaningful prospects. They've been either at the East West, the Senior Bowl, they'll all be at the Combine, I'm sure. And you can't watch seven guys at one time.
Yeah.
So you end up having to watch the same games multiple times. I remember it was maybe 3, 4 years ago that I think Georgia had nine guys. I think I watched the same games three times, because you have to.
Well, and ironically enough, half of them just ended up on the Eagles anyway. So, it's
Right, right, right. Well, it's funny. Before we did this, I've been watching Ole Miss and their defense. They've got a lot of, really good prospects. And I was watching them against LSU, among many games that I will watch because I try to watch 5 or 6 games, not just one or two. And I can't watch LSU's offensive tackles at the same time I'm watching, Ole Miss,
right.
defensive players. So I'll have to go back and watch this game again and focus on Will Campbell and Emory Jones. You can't watch eight guys at one time. Or I can't. If somebody can, more power to him. I can't do that.
It always blows my mind, like for Dane Brugler, for example, the fact that he's able to put basically, I think it ends up being like 400 something prospects
Yeah.
in his beast draft
And
guide.
Dane does an unbelievable job, but he does that all year round. If I did that I mean, when I get into the college guys, I say to myself, God, if I could do this all year round, because I love it. It's just a different feel for me because obviously you have to understand concepts when you watch football, no matter what you're watching. You have to understand, like if I'm watching Trey Amos, who I like as a corner on Ole Miss, I still have to understand what the coverage concepts are because I have to know if he's executing the concept the right way. So you still have to understand schemes and tactics. But in college, I end up focusing more on the individuals, their traits, their attributes, their characteristics, where I've evolved over time with the NFL to focus a lot more on schemes and tactics. For the teams that I do radio shows for, like in Nashville, yeah, I'm more conscious. Like obviously this year, I made it a point to look at Latham close every week because first round pick, but just in general, because for years I would get calls from writers saying, "Hey, can I pick your brain on? I have to pick an all-pro team. Who's the best left guard?" And I'm like, I'm not really watching the tape like that.
Yeah.
I'm just not, like obviously for Tennessee, yeah, am I studying Skoronski? Sure. But just in general, I'm not charting left guards,
Right. Yeah.
because
Got to be efficient at some point, Greg. You got
exactly.
teams to
Yeah.
talk about.
I mean, it takes me 2.5 hours just generally to get through one side of a ball anyway during the NFL season without, doing breakdowns of individual players.
Right.
So but yeah, so it's fun. It's a whole different approach and I like it.
Well, certainly we have a lot to talk about this coming off season, but first we have to get through the Super Bowl, which is
Oh, that game, that's right. Yeah.
to be, I know it always seems like so far away until we get to the week of, and then everything just seems to get swept up in the news that comes out of Super Bowl week before the actual game
And
takes
and I
place.
don't know about you, but then I start seeing, some which I don't watch a lot of it, all the Super Bowl pregame stuff that's unrelated to the game I'm talking about,
Right.
and I'm like, not really interested in all that stuff. That doesn't really, do, but it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah. No, it's always a good time, and certainly
Yeah.
New Orleans hosting the game for the 11th time is always they always do an excellent job with it. I know you're looking forward to getting down there and
Yep.
participating in all of the activities. But the game in particular, Greg, is a rematch. We saw these two clubs face off at the end of the 2022 season, but the
Yeah.
Eagles are obviously different from the standpoint of the coordinators are different. This is not
Yes.
exactly the same matchup, and fair to expect that this game would not play itself out the same way. And there's no way to predict what this is going to look like, but understanding the kind of parties that are on both sides of this thing. There's a lot of old head coaches coaching in this game, from Andy Reid to Steve Spagnuolo to Vic Fangio, kind of the top of the list. I know Kellen Moore's not necessarily a graybeard as far as his coaching resume goes, but he's certainly been around the game for a long period of time at this point. Just from a 1,000-foot view, Greg, what are you most interested in before we talk about specifics here?
Wow, because there's so many variables to this
Right.
game. Um, ooh, you know, in an odd way, and I've been because I think this through, and I don't have any inside information, obviously, because this time of year you're certainly not talking to coaches, and they certainly wouldn't be telling you anything, even if you did. So it's really irrelevant. But I just have an odd sense that the Eagles are going to come out throwing the football. And I know that might sound really strange given that they've really been a Barkley team and he had, arguably as good a season as any running back in the history of the game and certainly could have broken a record if they chose to play him the final week of the season. Um, and just his ability to make those long runs, because that's what their offense has really evolved into. They get their explosive plays more so from the run game. They're kind of an antithetical and anathema to what everybody believes about the league, that, hey, it's a passing league. The big plays percentage-wise come out of the pass game, which is true, by the way. But the Eagles sort of were a little bit different. They tended to get their more explosive plays out of the run game. But for some reason, Buck, don't forget Jalen Hurts, there are defined strengths and defined limitations with Jalen Hurts. Everybody knows what they are. But he's not a rookie quarterback. He's been in a lot of big games. He's played well. He's a calm player. I just believe that they're going to come out throwing the ball a little more than one might expect. And again, certain kinds of throws. I'm not saying they're just going to start tossing it all over the yard. It'll be clearly calculated throws and concepts. But my guess is, you tell me. I mean, wouldn't you sense most people would think that, hey, it's a Barkley game and they're just going to, get him going early?
Oh, sure, because that's what you've seen all year long. But the thing
Yeah,
about coaches, right, they don't want to show you everything that they've got, especially when you've got the opportunity to potentially show off some different stuff in a Super Bowl. And not necessarily saying, Greg, that they would put some concepts out there that they haven't coached or haven't, tried before.
right.
Not that's not what I'm saying, but like for example, the Chiefs, I think a lot of the numbers would lend itself to what you're saying too about Kansas City being such a good run defense throughout the course of the regular season. Then all of a sudden they're giving up damn near 5 yards a carry in these two postseason games at this point in time. So one would think, why not just continue that trend with Saquon Barkley? But the beauty about the way that this Eagles team is built specifically is they can play both ways if they really want to.
Yeah, I think their pass game is an interesting pass game because one of the thing about Jalen Hurts, and this is one of his limitations, and they know this, is he doesn't really work the middle of the field really well. Now, again, I don't want people to hear that and say, "Oh, I've seen him throw in the middle." Of course, you've seen him throw in the middle. He's an NFL quarterback. He's been doing this a long time, but in the championship game against the Commanders, he did not throw one ball between the numbers. And there were a couple of times he could have, and he chose not to. My sense is he just doesn't see that as clearly. But they still can throw the ball. They've got two really good receivers. They work outside the numbers really well. They're schemed really well. And there's so many elements and so many layers to the Eagles offense because of the run game with Barkley, the element in the run game that Hurts brings, a lot of the motions. They've started to use more motions now. A lot of different screen elements to their pass game. There's a lot of layers to their offense that allows them to be a very efficient throwing the ball as they were against the Commanders that don't require Hurts dropping back and making tight window throws between the numbers. So their pass game can be very efficient, Buck. It's just, it's not the same looking pass game, let's say, as the Detroit Lions. It
Correct.
just looks different. But hey, that's what happens. There's many ways to do all different things in the NFL.
No question about it. And the thing that's going to be interesting there, Greg, if that is in fact the tack that Philadelphia chooses to take, is we know that Steve Spagnuolo is going to try and heat Jalen Hurts up if they get into drop back situations. And certainly KC, with the sixth highest pressure rate of any defense, could cause issues for Jalen Hurts in that particular situation. That chess match, before we're going to talk about the chess match across the board, obviously, but Kellen Moore versus Steve Spagnuolo is one
Yeah.
of the more interesting coaching matchups you could get.
Yeah, and the one thing about Spags, and I think a lot of people might think, man, he blitzes all the time because he's so successful when he does it. That's not the case. He's not necessarily one of the highest percentage blitzers of D coordinators in the league. It's just he's so good situationally and they're
Yeah.
successful. Um, and the one thing to keep in mind, and this is something that this is a homework game for the Eagles because, and I've had this conversation with Ross Tucker. They use defensive backs a ton in their pressure packages. In fact, during the regular season, defensive backs were part of their pressures, the second highest percentage in the league. Only the Bucks use defensive backs more, and then that's a Todd Bowles thing as well. So they do that. But the offensive linemen, they put their hand in the dirt and they've got a certain sense of tunnel vision because so they're not seeing everything. So you have to be really aware based on your formations offensively that, hey, this formation could lead to a defensive back being part of a pressure package. And that's going to be on the quarterback. And ideally the center to some extent, but it's harder. So it's really, I think this is a Jalen Hurts game more so in that regard, as far as understanding where pressures could be coming from. And I'm sure they worked on that. Obviously we're doing this with 4 or 5 days before the game, so they're still working on it, I'm sure, because you can't study enough to know. I mean, I remember, you know, I listened to something Tom Brady did a couple of days ago when he talked about when they played the Chiefs and he was with the Bucks and they beat them badly in the Super Bowl. And he had talked about how hard he worked in the 2 weeks leading up to that game so that he wouldn't be surprised by anything he saw from Steve Spagnuolo. And obviously they had success, and you're dealing with Brady. And he even admitted, he said, look, I'm a veteran quarterback. I've seen a lot of things,
Mhm.
but Jalen has played a lot of football too. So that to me, that's a really intriguing part of this game.
And certainly he was up to the moment the last time these two teams played,
Oh, without
specifically
question.
in this game. Greg, one more matchup I'd like to ask you on the Philadelphia offense, Chiefs defense side before we pivot to the other side of things is A.J. Brown in this game. He's first in yards per route run against man this season.
Yeah,
Chiefs do play a fair amount of man coverage. I
they
wonder if
do.
that's
And
not
they
a
play a lot of
favorable
press.
matchup for Philadelphia.
Yeah, what's going to be interesting. Look, these teams played week 11 last year too, not just the Super Bowl. And in that game, they basically put your good friend Snead on because he was with the Chiefs then. They put him on Brown much of the game, and Brown was not a factor in the game. Um, McDuffie over the last month or so, Trent McDuffie, he's basically been an outside corner. He's not played in the slot. They've made that change, I'd say a month or so ago, because he was playing quite a bit in the slot. But he's played purely outside over the last month, and he's a really good press corner. Now, normally they play sides because the other side is a combination of sort of Johnson and Watson. I think you're going to see Watson get the large majority of snaps because Johnson struggled a bit. So the question is, does McDuffie travel with Brown or do they just play the way they've been playing in which they play sides? But they do play a lot of press. That's a Steve Spagnuolo belief that you just don't let receivers freely off the line of scrimmage. So that brings it now to Kellen Moore. This is the chess match. Now, this is why football's such a great game
Yeah.
because now Kellen Moore knows this too. So he's probably not going to just line up in static formations where they can just line up and press. He's going to use a lot of motion. He'll use a lot of formation variation. There'll be bunches, there'll be stacks, there'll be all kinds of things that sort of make it a little more difficult for the Chiefs and Spagnuolo to play the way he wants to play.
On the other side of things, speaking of making things difficult for the Chiefs, Vic Fangio, we've talked about him a great deal
Yep.
this year for obvious reasons, Greg. And I think people forget that this is not an unfamiliar opponent for Vic Fangio. Beyond the
No.
preparation that they'll do in the lead up to this game, this man coached Denver for several years. He's seen Mahomes.
6 times they played, and yeah, and Mahomes kind of ate them up. There was only one game where the numbers weren't great, but we actually in our matchup room went through that game, and there were a bunch of drops by the Chiefs. I mean, it wasn't really Vic's defense, shutting them down. Even though Mahomes, I believe, was only 15 for 29 in that game, but there were some clear drops. But so that raises another interesting point about this game. The Chiefs have really evolved into playing a lot with multiple tight ends, predominantly with two tight ends, but sometimes with three. whereas the Eagles have evolved into basically being a nickel defense. They do not want Cooper DeJean, their slot corner, to come off the field.
Mhm.
So the question is, will they stay nickel if the Chiefs go with a good percentage of two tight ends? Sometimes the Chiefs play with two tight ends 35% of their snaps. Sometimes if you add in the snaps with three tight ends, they could be 50+% of their snaps with multiple tight ends. So again, we don't know what the Chiefs will do, Buck, but will the Eagles stay with their nickel? My sense is they will because DeJean's a big physical guy for a slot corner and he's willing to tackle and be competitive. But that'll be interesting, and that leads to some interesting matchups. The other side of the other part to me, which is going to be really interesting on that side of the ball, is kind of the Jalen Carter issue.
Mm.
Because what we've seen, Carter's been phenomenal, particularly over the last, let's say, 2 months, where I bet he's played 95+% of the snaps, which is remarkable, given that in college he probably played like 30% of the snaps at Georgia. Um, but Trey Smith is the right guard for the Chiefs, and normally Carter lines up on the left side of the defense. That's pretty much where he lines up. Most teams slide their center to Carter. Will the Chiefs do that? Trey Smith is probably going to be the highest paid guard in the NFL after this season, and he's a really good player, as
Yeah.
you know. I mean, fans know he's, Tennessee. I think he was only,
Titans fans are dying for him here, Greg. They thought they got the Chiefs assistant GM. Go ahead and get Trey Smith next, you know?
and who knows? I mean,
Possible.
could that theoretically happen? I guess that would be a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But so the question is, do they slide or do they say, hey, Trey Smith is damn good. He can block Carter one-on-one because the other matchup, if you slide to Carter, is Mike Caliendo is now their left guard. He's the weakness on the O line in pass pro, and Milton Williams is the other D tackle. And that's not a household name, Buck, but I watch the Eagles every week.
Yeah.
He has been phenomenal. He has been so good this year that would be a little bit of a problem. Now, the other factor that plays into all this is Mahomes. I mean, Mahomes can move. He's got unbelievable spatial awareness. He normally doesn't get sacked a lot. He runs more in the playoffs. So there's, you know, I feel like I'm rambling, but this stuff gets, this is what football is to me. This is going into the weeds. This is what this game's about. It's easy to say, well, the Chiefs have to stop the run. I mean, yeah, of course, but I like to think we do a little more than that.
No, it's the culmination of all the
Yeah.
things that these teams have put on tape throughout the course of the season,
Yeah.
building to this moment. This is, of course, what makes it so much fun. And I think that's a really salient point, though, Greg, because at least from the untrained eye, my perspective, and probably for a good deal of the audience, watching the AFC Championship game, for example, Pat took more sacks than
He
I'm
did.
used
He
to
did.
seeing him take. And Buffalo was doing a good job finding ways to create pressure, but it was just an anomaly, I think, compared to
I
the rest of the
agree.
Patrick Mahomes experience. And I wonder if that doesn't, if
Yeah.
the Eagles can't find a way to continue to find ways to get that pressure on him.
Yeah, and the Eagles certainly can pressure the quarterback. As good as Tooney has been, Joe Tooney, has played left tackle for the
Right.
last, I don't know, 6, 7 games. For the most part, he's done a solid job. But, depending on the opponent, I mean, what they played Houston twice, and Tooney clearly struggled against Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter. Now, a lot of tackles do, but so that's another issue in this game. Can Josh Sweat, get some pressure against Tooney? Well, they feel they have to help Tooney, which they've done over the course of these 6, 7 games, depending on the situation. They've either done it through formation, where you align a tight end up next to him because that changes the path of a pass rusher. They've done it with chips. You can help in multiple ways. So I think that's just one of those interesting factors in this game and how it's going to play out. But you do have, both quarterbacks. You do have the movement factor, and that can change things because it can change how teams rush, but it also changes how you protect, knowing that the quarterback can get out of bad situations.
Yeah. And, I mean, for Mahomes' one Super Bowl loss that he's got on his resume, the pressure was a huge part of that. Now, obviously, they were dealing with a ton of offensive line injuries in
Yeah.
that game, and he was under duress the entire time against the Buccaneers. But this is going to be a curious matchup from a variety of different fronts. I can't wait, Greg. I know people, might have Chiefs Eagles fatigue or whatever, but like the game itself is going to be fascinating.
You know what? I let's enjoy the fact that, hey, the Chiefs are a really good team. Mahomes is a phenomenal player. Let's enjoy it. I mean, Hurts is in his second Super Bowl in 3 years. You know, I think we should be enjoying it more than saying, "Oh man, I wish there was somebody else." Hey, we all feel that way at times. You all like to see the new kid on the block. But these are two really good teams, and I think most people would probably say they're the two best teams in each conference. I think they sort of felt that way beginning like the midpoint of the season that these were the, you know, two best teams. I think a lot of people thought maybe this could be the Bills' year, and obviously that game was super close and super competitive, and the Chiefs happened to win it. But it's two really good teams. Coaching staffs are really good. I mean, Vic Fangio, Spags, two of the best D coordinators, that have been doing it a really long time. Andy Reid, obviously. Kellen Moore is a as you know, he's a highly respected offensive coach in this league, and will probably, from what you read, looks like he might get the Saints job when this is all said and done.
Yeah, highest percentage chance for certain at this point for New Orleans, with that being the only job availability left. Greg, when next we meet, we'll be recapping the Super Bowl and we'll have another season in the books. Buddy, it's been 4 seasons of doing this podcast with you,
It's
and I
been awesome, man. Yeah, let's just keep doing it.
each and every one. I'm going to sneak on down to New Orleans for a couple of days this week, so I'm looking forward to catching up in person then.
Yeah,
And
no, I'll be heading out, and I always look forward to seeing, good friends on Radio Row. You see once or twice a year, so that's always a lot of fun.
yeah, we all enjoy these NFL convention type of events, whether it be
This and the combine,
combine.
it's yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's good stuff for everybody
Yeah.
involved. And when next we meet, we'll be able to talk about who came out victorious here and how they got there and start to pick apart the bones of this offseason because God knows the Titans have a lot of needs on their
They
roster,
sure
Greg.
do. And I'm grinding away watching college tape, but that Trey Smith point, that would be very interesting because I forgot with the new GM. I mean, who knows? I mean, we'll see.
No NFL market elsewhere in the country finds offensive line play as attractive as the Tennessee Titans fans do at this point in time.
Well,
They're
Bill Callahan is still here, and he's incredibly respected, obviously. It's funny, just before we finish up,
yeah.
when I was at the O-line Masterminds event in Frisco, Texas last July, I got a chance to talk to Trey Smith. Obviously not about the Titans, but just talking about, O-line play. He's a really, I don't know did you ever interview him or anything when he was at Tennessee?
No, we never had him on our radio show, but Ramon Foster obviously played O-line at Tennessee, and he's done the morning show a million times.
He's a very impressive guy.
Yeah,
Very impressive guy. He was really intriguing to talk to, smart, aware. I mean, and it's funny. I've been with films for 45 years, and there was a stretch where I was the interview guy, and for years and years, I did a ton of interviews. I mean, player after player after player after player. 99.9% of them are great guys who are really thoughtful about the game. And I've interviewed former players 1,000 times too. There's that very small percentage that you come away and go, oh man. But when you really talk to these guys, because don't forget, you're dealing with people at the top of their profession.
right,
You don't just get there. When you get to the NFL, it's more than just talent. Obviously, these guys have more talent than you and I, Buck. We know that. We know they're the cream of the crop when it comes to physical traits. But to be that good, there's a mental and intellectual aspect to that as well. And when you get a chance to really talk to these guys, there's a lot there.
Oh no, to last in the NFL, we
Yeah.
understand how short the career lifespans of these guys are. To be able to sustain
Yep.
any meaningful level, you have to have as much of that full package as humanly
Yep.
possible, the intellect and the physical ability.
Yep. Yep. So it's great. So I'm really looking forward to the game. And I think all we hope for, if you don't have a horse in the race, is that it's a close, competitive, compelling game.
Yeah. And when next we get together for the podcast, Greg, we should have an announcement that we will be able to make.
Ah,
There'll be
okay.
a time and a date for us to get back together with the audience and to do something that we've enjoyed doing the last couple of years, one of the live shows. And hopefully we have some more fun stuff planned for the audience this year.
That sounds great, Buck. Looking forward to it.
All right, buddy. Take care. I'll see you in NOLA.
All right.